What a privilege it is to host another incredible group of panelists for the next conversation of the day, hosted by Six, which is around how citizens can shape possible futures for cities. So we've introduced our panelists already, but I'd just like to say good morning to Jane from Toronto in Canada and Javier from Bogota in Colombia. It's bright and early for you, so thank you for joining us for this fantastic conversation so early in the morning. Yunus, nice to see you again. Good afternoon in Turkey. And Onur, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. I've not attempted to say your surname as I don't think I can, but please do feel free to introduce it when you speak. So this is the second time that Jane and Javier have come together for a conversation on this topic just in autumn last year. And we were so inspired by where that conversation went and took us, available on the Six website, of course, that we wanted to see where else it could go and where it could take us. And we're also really interested to see if our participants from Turkey, some of these conversations and topics resonate with you both as well. So I'd like to start this conversation off, this sadly very short 45 minutes off, but I'd like to start this first conversation off with Jane and Javier, and kind of going back to some of the things that you've talked about before and that you're working on in your own capacities. And I know you're all part of organizations here, but do let us know if you're talking from a different personal perspective or different perspectives to the formal organization on the agenda. And I'm going to ask you a first question around your visions for the cities that we all live in, the cities of the future. And in particular, how do, so one, what is your vision of how you want the cities to be? And secondly, how do you manage the tension between kind of addressing the needs now in a city, but also helping to shape the systems govern our city in the future? And I will go to Jane first to kick us off, and then to Javier, and then I'll ask our Turkish guests how these kind of approaches resonate with them.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Nothing like a big question to plunge right in. So,
hope you've had a coffee, Jane.
Exactly. So first of all, bonjour and greetings, everyone. I must correct Louise that I'm in Montreal and not Toronto, which is a very different city in Canada. It's an island here, which is also known as Tiohtià:ke, and I wanted to acknowledge that I'm on unceded territories here of Indigenous peoples, of the Mohawk peoples, and I'm very grateful to live here, and I'd like to pay respects to the people who have been caretakers of the lands and waters here for thousands of years before settlers were here. So it's in that spirit that I'd also like to say that we're aiming to think differently about city building now. And there's an incredible opportunity to do so. And one of the ways we're doing it is that we're trying to center the question of how can we think now about the physical, the digital, the social infrastructures that we need to build now so that children in 7 generations will thrive in equitable and regenerative cities. So that's really the frame that we're trying to think in. And if we bring it, though, to the tension that Louise raised, of course, of the dire needs and the problems that we have on the ground right now, how do we square that up, right? So one of the ways is, I would suggest, is that we not see these things as a dichotomy, first of all, because we have to think about addressing crisis needs now, which are ever present and they're growing actually, but we have to think about ways to address those which are also systemic and building for the long term. And that's not easy to do, but we have a particular possibility now, especially now, even now, as we're in what is still a liminal space really, that it's before we're post-pandemic. So I think that rather than having a tendency to sort of wait and see how things play out, we actually need to make the most of this clearly liminal space that we're in. So I'll give just one example of that for now. And that is about how people on the ground and cities need to have agency and not wait for other levels of government, right? And I want to apply that specifically to housing. So I don't know about the cities where you are, but we have cities here where housing has become an asset class for the rich. And there is no justice in that. And even in this past pandemic year, in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, parts of those cities, housing prices year on year have gone up by over 30%. It's just absolutely unjust, and we can't, we cannot continue in this way. So what do we do about this? Well, at national level, of course, there are things like national housing strategies. There's a national housing supply challenge, which is underway, and we actually need to do more with people on the ground and with cities. And a couple of things that are happening that are about unlocking agency, energy, and creativity people are, one is looking at the right to housing movement and applying that at city level and implementing that at city level. A second one is through the work that we're doing with Future Cities Canada. It's about working with young people in some programs called Future City Builders and the 30 Under 30 Network, so that the creativity of young people is brought to bear to housing challenges. So they're creating, for example, means to match up people like young people and elderly and others to actually live together in order to take care of each other and also at the same time address housing challenges. And then, of course, we also have the opportunity, because our downtowns are radically shifting. Office buildings are nearly empty at the moment. Some of that will change post-pandemic, but certainly not all of it. So what opportunities are there to retrofit downtown buildings, for example, for housing, including housing that is affordable and that is for people without homes. So maybe I should, well, I hesitate. I'm going to make just one more quick point, and that is just that we really need to think in terms of different accountabilities, again, for short-term and long-term, and we need transcendent metaphors, I would argue, for city building. So let's not think of our cities just as their constituent parts of housing here, transport there, and so on. We actually need to think of our cities almost as planets, or as, giant living, breathing beings that we co-create with nature. So they're sort of giant human nature collaborations. So I just want to leave us with that metaphor to start. Thanks.
Jane, that could not be a better segue. And you can see why you and Javier have such great conversations, because Javier, I wonder, from your position in Bogota government and really thinking about culture and nature and how they can be, citizens and think about those things in different ways to take actions differently in our daily lives. This is a perfect time to ask you for your perspective on this.
Thank you so much, Louise, and to Social Innovation Exchange for being the host and the link to this summit, and to Yunus, Honor, and Jane, such a pleasure to be sharing conversation with you. So first, let me also emphasize, as Jane, is that we also do not believe there's a dichotomy. In fact, we need to emphasize that unless we shape systems for the long term, we will not be able to sustainably address the needs of the now. It's a big lesson we've learned, right? And when I say we, it's kind of like the big human family. The past 2 centuries, we saw an exponential growth of the human population, and also a significant and growing proportion of it that has found ways to meet its material needs. But this has come as a great cost, right? The cost of a very bare bones, economically focused vision of development has left us with a present situation in which we face, right, increased pandemic and public health risks, ecosystems collapse, biodiversity collapse, climate change, widening inequality, right, and persistent injustice in many forms. So if we really want to respond to the challenge of addressing the needs now of those that are in the direst situations and in the hardest need, we need to be wiser than we were in the past. But I am positive about this. I believe in the power of human ingenuity and also in the humility of co-creating with nature, as Jane was pointing, so that we can design and learn both for the present moment and with a view for the long-term future. And I think that the answer, the key to make this happen, is participation. Participation in a really deep sense of the word that should materialize ultimately in the public sphere, in public conversation, where not only state agents, but also agents from organized civil society, from academia and educational institutions, from international cooperation, from local communities and their own knowledge traditions, join together to focus on how to participate not just in building the present, but also in imagining our futures. And this seems to be quite a radical proposal when you are facing critical issues such as housing or extreme poverty here in Colombia. But our experience shows us that it's quite possible and that it makes a lot of sense. An experience we are having right now here has to do with a waste management system in the city. So as many other cities in the global south, we have over 25,000 people that are informal waste pickers that, walk through the city day and night to sort through our trash. And what we are doing right now is to convene creatives and artists and citizens from across the city to participate in a scholarship so that they can, together with the informal waste picker population, devise possible futures that are more desirable and just for all, and then use the lenses of culture and of art to touch the sensibilities of people and understand how those imaginations of the future can shape our decisions today. So I think our colleagues from Turkey will a lot to add on this, given what I've read about your trajectories. But I would just like to end on that note. I think we have a clear message from the scientific community, from deep indigenous knowledge traditions, from across the planet that share the core of this message, from policy analysis and policy geeks and experts from across the planet that are insisting that we do not merely focus on ourselves in the present, but that we need to have a view not just across time, even a time that an imagination evaporates, right? How will the world be 7 generations down? It's to put a number so that our imagination is left completely free, but it's also across species and to the rest of nature to try and question the deep divide we seem to have traced between culture and nature and see ourselves as clearly interdependent and interbeing. So that is a first contribution to our conversation.
Thank you so much for that wonderfully generous contribution. I'd like to go to our colleagues in Turkey and to see how much of that resonated with the work that you do and the thinking that you have around city building, and particularly the role of citizens and thinking about the future and the present and many of the other things that Javier and Jane have talked about. Yunus, maybe I'll go to you first, and then Onur, I'll come to you.
Would it be possible if we start with Onur first? Because he's the person from Turkey as a representative of a megapolitan in Turkey, and they just launched very important things just today. Because I'm representing a network of local governments, and personally I'm based in Bonn, so you can see the sunshine, but it is not the Turkish sun, but it is the German sun. So I would prefer if I can complement what Onur would say, if it's okay for you.
Absolutely. Well, welcome, Onur, and I think that's a fantastic suggestion. Thank you, Yunus, and welcome, Onur. You're the councillor to the mayor of Izmir and a leading advisor on city branding and city diplomacy in Turkey. So please, how does any of that resonate with the work that you do?
Thank you, Luis. Yunus, thank you. Actually, that resonates very well. We are very ambitious here in Izmir when it comes to empowering the citizens and when it comes to promoting the nature and culture. And Yunus, he's extremely energetic and resourceful person who brings cities together, because ICLEI, the Sustainable Cities Network, they are based in Bonn, and they are working very closely with the United Nations environmental institutions. And today, actually, we were in a meeting with Yunus like 1 hour ago, together with Mayor Soyer and Mayor Döner of Bonn. Well, as I'm practicing a lot of international collaboration, so I must say that the cities are the nexus of an emerging global policy network. Mass urbanization makes cities where people live, work, interact, and engage in political matters. As a result, cities have quite a unique transformative power for our planet. And Yunus is making tremendous contribution to this, transformation. So cities are extending their capacity to orchestrate collective actions among local actors, citizens, and they deal with global challenges. In this way, cities contribute to the progress of more inclusive, transparent, effective, more legitimate global governance. People has a larger role to play thanks to this emerging global policy network. So my hometown, Izmir, is a very large Mediterranean port city with 4.5 million inhabitants, and we have 8,500 years of history. For hundreds of years, the goods traded through the Silk Road has been sent to European and North African countries from Izmir, and services and people came to the city along with the goods. People also brought their arts, their culture. The city has become the point where Eastern and Western cultures mingle and live together. So actually, we know the secret of leading a happy, meaningful, and more productive life. The secret is being in harmony with nature and turning to culture for creating the meanings. We know the secret, but unfortunately, most often we fail to get there. With this interpretation, in Izmir, we are going to organize a very important cultural event. I'm sure that Javier is familiar with this event. This is the UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments, which is a global organization which brings together almost every municipalities or local governments in the world. We are going to organize the UCLG Culture Summit 2021 in Izmir. The COVID crisis has made very evident that cities and communities have profound need for culture. So people have turned to culture to reinforce the sense of belonging in their communities, in their cities. And they need to create meaning and solidarity, and culture is a very useful tool for this, for this purpose. And mayors and local leaders, academics, civil society organizations, cultural networks, key stakeholders, they will all come to Izmir. We will discuss together the place of culture in sustainable development. We will exchange on fostering cultural policies on heritage, creativity, diversity, and knowledge, which are the key for local sustainable development and SDGs. And in this, Culture Summit, we will promote culture as the fourth pillar of sustainable development, and we will promote culture as a core component of global solidarity among our people, obviously, among our communities. We will try to empower our people. We will try to give spaces to our citizens where they can actualize themselves and they can, express their cultural identities and cultural values, priorities. So I believe that this is going to be, very enriching experience for city. I can say that Izmir, we will meet, share, dialogue, and create together the futures of our society. I don't want to talk longer. I don't want to take too much time, but the last several years, we had very difficult times with the COVID. We had a major earthquake in Izmir. We lost, 117 people during this pandemic earthquake, all the disasters, flood, drought, all these. And we became very capable on crisis management. And we also introduced an institutional innovation. We called it crisis municipalism. And through this approach, we changed the regular modality of carrying out municipal operations. In this scope of municipalism, crisis municipalism, first, we defined a new process for municipal operations. Second, we established new decision-making, executive and consultative bodies where people, civil society organizations, but also individuals can take part in the decision-making and implementation process. Now people, they are not only the consumer of public services, but they're also co-creator. We are providing support, or we are encouraging social innovations, social entrepreneurs, along with the economic entrepreneurs. And we are empowering people so they can contribute to economic, social, political, cultural life of the city. And third, in the scope of the crisis municipalism, we strengthened the solidarity and volunteering in the city. This is another way to make contributions and enrich the city life. So, I mean, I can talk in depth and longer, but I want to stop here and I want to thank you, Luis.
Well, thank you, Onur. I think, you know, there's definitely some interest in your event here on the panel, at least. We'll make sure you're all connected. But it sounds like a very significant thing for a city to be doing, to hosting an event in that way. And the way you were talking about the involvement of citizens, I just think, you know, if we have more cities around the world like the ones that are represented here on the panel today, we'd be in a better place. Yunus, tell us from the perspective of ICLEI, you know, you're such a big network that most people who work or touch work with cities have touched ICLEI and been part. So you have a really interesting global perspective on this. Tell us, what are you seeing in terms of a movement to a different approach of thinking about cities and really thinking about city as a planet, as James suggested?
Thank you, Luis. First of all, thanks for IMEC Summit for the invitation and the SIX team for inviting us to this special panel. I'm proud of obviously representing a network whose members are already here speaking from Vancouver, Bogota, Izmir. If you look at the details, whatever you see something about sustainability, there is a flavor of ICLEI in those efforts. This is a network created in 1990. Actually, that was the year when history was changing. When the wall collapsed, the world was going into a smaller village. ICLEI kicked off as an inspirational idea that on the Way to Earth Summit, how can we contribute to solve global problems through local action? And that the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992 ended up with a revolutionary thinking that the United Nations accepted the role of major groups, and one of them was local authorities. It was a pressure from ICLEI and their leaders at that time. I was a university student in Ankara at that moment. I was not aware of ICLEI at all, but the legacy now goes on because the spirit of local Agenda 21, I mean, you can hardly find someone who knows about Agenda 21, but if you ask anyone in the world, local Agenda 21 is like a brand that is the most open source process that you can think about, because tens of thousands of cities have done it independently from ICLEI. And after all these years, when we were dealing with these, now it's a network of more than 1,700 cities around the world, small or big, state of Sao Paulo to Des Moines to Seoul to Izmir or Seferihisar as one of our revolutionary cities as well. So how we define now as our work on sustainability, we are saying that our efforts should be low emission, nature-based, circular, resilient, and people-centered. That is how we define our pathway to sustainability. And in that regard, maybe since we are talking about very inspirational ideas, and if I can just make it a tour in time and tour in the world. So I will connect you now a couple of cities in time, if I may, because I'm also personally attached to these cities. I will start with Curitiba. It's a worldwide known as really the starter of sustainability. In 1970s, they have created this bus lanes. It was remarkable at that time. A couple of years ago, when I was a student, I was a primary school student, not in the university at that time. In 1980, there was a legendary mayor in Ankara. He introduced in his city, but he had one more thing. In Ankara, primary school student, the mayor asked waste newspapers, and he gave us a book back. So that was a recycling in the most primitive sense. And the city of Curitiba, a couple of years later, used the same logic for waste and bus tickets, because the people were not able to afford paying the cost of a bus ticket, but they had the difficulty with waste management. So that became also a learning exercise. A city inspired from another could be source of another inspiration. And a couple of minutes ago, there was an example from Seoul. Mayor of Seoul was inspirational. We really appreciate his leadership. He was 3 years president of ICLEI. But there was another city in Korea, for example, Suwon, who was introducing a city district 1 month car free. And that was, again, it was in 2013, because we know in Europe we celebrate this 1 day car free things, but opening or closing a city district for 1 month to cars is obviously, it was shocking, and that connects to the discussion. Sometimes leaders have to shock their societies. It is a challenge, but they have to face this challenge, because otherwise you cannot make progress. So that mayor was protested at the beginning when he decided this, but a year later he was elected once again in Korea at the highest margin of voter, let's say, difference that he was, because the people understood that, yes, we can benefit from a public service. And now I would like to connect this this is past, but how do we do the future? The ICLEI, one of the leaders of ICLEI was the mayor of Ankara in 1990. He's one of the first 15. But today, we have another leader from Turkey, Mayor of Soyer, as Onur mentioned. He released the Izmir Green Plan, Green City Plan, which was revolutionary thinking for the future to connect nature and cities. So that legacy, the learning exercise continues, and maybe conclude at the time of a world living as planets of cities. It's a planet of cities now. It is the golden opportunity in the next 10 years to shape the future of our planet, because it's the first time cities have a shaping responsible because of their masses and GDP and capacity. And Glasgow will be the city who is now hosting the COP. We don't know how much they will host because of the pandemic, but the mayor of Glasgow, Susan Aitken, is promoting that we were the city of industrial revolution, and we want to be the city of a green revolution, green industrial development, and that will be turning the rest of the world. We will bring thousands of cities with their climate neutrality, climate emergency declarations and commitments. This will be the hope for future, because that is where things will be starting to change, and that will shape the global agenda as well. But obviously, I also hear that the challenge is so big that national governments have to hear local governments, they have to generate resources, they have to respect their capacities, and they have to build it together. Maybe that could be my contribution to the discussion. And once again, it is a great pleasure to join this very, very exciting panel.
Thank you, Yunus. And I will say, although I will ask you one final question in the last 15 minutes, but I really do hope this is not the last time we come together and have this conversation. So just in our final moments, I'd like to ask you all, I mean, there is clearly some amazing things going on, and also clearly some very big challenges still to address. And so my final question is around, okay, the practical, what can we do? And I take this language a lot from Javier, because he talks a lot about the acupuncture points, what are the things that you can do that can make the biggest difference? So I will ask you all, and I'll start with Javier, actually, because I use your point, and then I'll go to Jane and to Yunus, and then I'll end with you, Onur, because we are in a Turkish summit here in a Turkish city, and so we should finish in that way. So Javier, and then Jane, and then Yunus and Onur, and I just ask you to keep your remarks to a couple of minutes each. Where are the acupuncture points? What should we do first? How can we start to move forward on some of this?
Great, Louise. Yes, let me be brief and build on the conversation. I think that the deep insight that Jane was inviting us to have of conceiving of cities as themselves living beings and as immersed in nature and not as separate from it and in need to be connected with has very deep implications for the practice. There's a recent development has been characterizing the debate that is going on in the conservation community. There is a raging debate about what conservation really means. Does it mean that we need to deepen the nature-culture divide and we need to keep some sort of wild or wilderness nature separate from human beings intact? Or are we inextricably related? There is actually no dichotomy. We are immersed, part of one same big system. What I think this means in practice is that our organizations, institutions, and systems that we build that are sort of designed by human ingenuity should respond to the same sort of design principles that we learn from nature, in nature, and from the knowledge and learning traditions that have been engaging in the observation and study of nature for as long as we can imagine, and from as diverse perspectives as can possibly be. What does this mean? Learning and adaptation are crucial. So industrialization has left us with organizations that are not designed to learn and adapt. They are designed to keep the status quo and be rigid, right? And resist. I think that part of what we need to do is design learning organizations that can evolve and respond to change, which is ultimately the defining feature of the world. And this is why I think we will slowly see a shift from the development discourse to a discourse that will emphasize evolution and adaptation. There are many examples of how this can happen, but part of it is what goes on here in Bogota with citizen culture. So the idea is that the agency of citizens can be a key component in the adaptation, the evolution of our cultural institutions in response to change. And where should we go? What's the vision? What's the direction of change? Should be a result of collective participation. So that's, if I had to mention just one acupuncture point, it would be that let's build the organizations for learning and for adaptation, and not merely for a narrow vision of a relatively narrow vision we've inherited of development.
Wonderful. Thank you, Javier. Jane.
Yes, I'll try to build on. My head is just spinning from all the thinking that has been sparked by the other speakers. So thank you for that. I guess I'd like to go for a moment. I'd like to make 2 points. One is about super granular culture change and how important that is at the neighborhood level, and sort of building on, culture of participation and even what I'd call a participatory worldview, which is really, normative in that it aims for social and economic justice for all, and agency of people. And I'd like to give an example that is in a place in this country that is experiencing a lot of anti-Indigenous racism at the moment. Of course, all cities everywhere are experiencing difficulties with racism, of course, and in many cases that's exacerbated now. Anti-Black, anti-women, anti-Muslim, anti-Asian. There's a lot of racism that is essential to change structurally and systemically at local level. And in one of our provinces here in Canada, Nova Scotia, there's been violence in the past year against Indigenous fishers by commercial fishers over access rights to fishing, right? And so it's exacerbated some of the tensions that exist. So one of the things that we've been working on with partners there is a way to, in a granular, everyday way, start to begin to change the culture. It's through not only an initiative that does that, but actually we're supporting Indigenous-led work, which is inviting of everyone. And so we're it's one of the places in Canada where we're right now adapting the participatory city model from the UK. So we're taking that approach, but we're adapting it to very different contexts. And Indigenous-led in Nova Scotia means that, Indigenous leaders there see in it very traditional ways that they're now adapting, making it their own, but also designing it in a way that everyone feels welcome. So African Nova Scotians and everyone. So that is making a difference in terms of changing power dynamics by centering Indigenous reconciliation. And in a similar vein, at the opposite end of the country in Vancouver, the city of Vancouver just last week is the first big city to adopt the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so together the city with the 3 First Nations on whose unceded territories the city is built are now going to work out what that means at city level. Okay, and then a final point I would just say is a filter that we need to use for all of these kinds of investment decisions at large scale and small scale, I would argue are 4 accountabilities. And those are accountabilities to all people, to future generations, to a circular economy, and specifically to the health of ecosystems. So that's it. Thank you.
An incredible amount of story and information to process in just one comment. So thank you, Jane, for that, and I particularly appreciate that the scales that you've talked about and how you're navigating between those scales in your work. Eunice.
So it is a hard question, but I'll try to answer. Before answering, let's realize, during the pandemic, what we discussed, what is the difference between the Spanish flu and the COVID-19? What we came up is that there are 2 things that is different. One, there was nothing called World Health Organization in 100 years ago. So there was no connectedness in global conscious. The second, that none of the local governments were as powerful as we have now. Because when COVID came, they didn't wait for World Health Organization, UCLG, ICLES, we immediately connected with our networks and they immediately rolled out. The city, New York City, who was the disastrous place once upon a time at the beginning, turned out to be the model for recovery and shaping up. So that gave me the notion that if we're talking about the next 10 years, the either the first or the last decade, because if we continue our past practices, this will be the last decade. But if we can use this as the first generation or the first decade, it will be the new world that we will be building. And this is an urban world. So connectedness of conscious citizens. I don't know how much I can quote this or tweet this, but connectedness is that we should be able to learn and help each other, because that's what the power. Conscious, because we have to rely on the individuals who elect the right people, who vote for the right politicians, and who ensure that they are not diverting their promises. And individual power, that this is the world that we have to take our control, because everything starts with the individual itself. And I think that could be my message, that I want all these kind of people to be connected to their local governments, to connected to their networks, be active and be courageous, so that we let this century and this decade be the start of a new world.
I couldn't agree more. And as an organization that is based on exchange and values exchange so much, I love this concept of connectedness. Oh no, to finish up for us, where should we be focusing first? Where is there kind of acupuncture points of practical action? You've mentioned many already, and so maybe you could conclude this panel for your experience.
Of course, Luis. I hope I don't have a trouble with my internet connection. But I mean, for myself, I have an equation for my efforts. I mean, and actually this, all Javier, Jane, Yunus, they all more or less touch to this equation of myself. I believe that I need to connect and provide interactions between actors. I mean, as the municipality, we need to connect with the citizens, and this is at the center of our work. But at the same time, we need to connect with the other cities of the world in order to collaborate on challenges which are transporters, like climate change, climate crisis, COVID-19. These are all difficulties which doesn't recognize the customs or borders. So, I mean, this is an equation of mine. I need to connect institutions, people, and I need to endeavor to allow them to have some kind of interactions, create as many transactions as possible. I mean, connecting business to each other, to civil society organizations, universities, academic institutions, municipalities, experts, and creating any kind of interactions, collaborations between them is this is my personal endeavor in life. This is what I do in Izmir Metropolitan Municipality. This is what I do in Turkish Social Democratic Municipalities Association. And all the other panelists more or less touch to this endeavor of mine. I believe this is most important or most global definitions of what we are trying to do, or what we need to do. After all, the world is a whole, and we need to confirm this wholeness. And this is going to happen by connecting people together. And these connections, in my opinion, brings also the democratic participation, inclusion, and I believe this can make us more prosperous community, a just community, and a more inclusive community where they can have a fair life with more, let's say, in a more friendly and nature-friendly environment. Today, as Yunus told us, we had a lunch where we presented our Green City Action Plan along with Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan in Izmir. We also presented our ICLEI Global Executive Board's membership, and it was a good start for us, where we will connect with our citizens, where we will work together to protect the nature with their contributions and with their own resources. So, I would say the acupuncture point is connecting and, working together, living together. Thank you, Louis.
Thank you. Well, in many ways, panels where everyone agrees with each other are very boring, but this was not that. And thank you all for your time. What a privilege it was to host a conversation with such brilliant minds and thinkers. Onur, Yunus, Javier, Jane, thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy and your inspiration. I'm glad you had a successful lunch, and Jane and Javier, I hope you have an equally successful lunch when you get to it. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.